My name is John Gant. I'm president of the ICCF, the International Conservation Caucus Foundation. Please take double cupcakes, take them all the way home because we don't need them and it's just going to make our waistline grow. Anyway, welcome to the last briefing of the 2010 U.S. Congressional Briefing Series with the ICCF. I think some of you, most of you have been to briefings with us before, so it's going to be a rather similar format. Just to really go over our mission, basically the ICCF's mission is to educate policymakers, business leaders, NGO leaders in the importance of good natural resource management and biodiversity protection and its links to poverty alleviation, sustainable economic development, regional security, global food and water security, and what we now term as natural security. So what we're trying to do is push, as America has exported capitalism, as we exported democracy, is that America should also be exporting the philosophy of good natural resource management. This is our advisory council for the largest U.S.-based international conservation NGOs. Kelly Allward is here from WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society, and I know Bill Millen, I saw from Nature Conservancy, just walked in. I think we have somebody here from World Wildlife Fund. Vanessa, yes, and somebody from Conservation International, not our usual. Would you like to introduce yourself? Frank Hawkins from Conservation International is here. So that is our advisory council, and WCS will be chairing this presentation today. This is a broad spectrum of some of our larger corporate and NGO partners that are involved in a lot of these critical issues. We meet together as a group about 4 or 5 times a year, and a lot of these logos are from corporations that have been part of briefings on Capitol Hill here. Our approach to conservation, which a lot of these, most of these corporations choose, is one of what we are focusing on, which is Teddy Roosevelt approach to conservation, a market-based approach to conservation, and a public-private partnership approach to conservation. And we, as the ICCF, throughout the year highlight a variety of what the corporate as well as the NGO partners are doing in these respects across the globe. Just to give you an idea, the U.S. Congressional International Conservation Caucus, there's a list outside. I hope everybody's boss who's here is a member of the caucus. If not, the caucus leadership is Hal Rogers, Ed Royce, John Tanner, who's obviously leaving, and Norm Dix in the House, and in the Senate, Sam Brownback, who's on the way out, Sheldon Whitehouse, Tom Udall, and Olympia Snow. And the caucus actually is the second largest caucus on Capitol Hill. About 1/3 of the House, 1/5 of the Senate. A lot of people, a lot of the congressmen are very active in it. And obviously we hope to keep it that way for the next 2011. Just wanted to bring your attention to a new department of the International Conservation Caucus Foundation. At our annual gala that we recently had here in Washington, we launched the Conservation Council of Nations, which is like our Conservation Council, is a group within the ICCF dedicated to approach these 3 different types of approaches: market-oriented solution, Teddy Roosevelt approach, and public-private partnership approach in the developing world. We have 23 member countries now that are members of the Conservation Council of Nations, and that should increase very soon. Now on to our briefing today, which I'll ask Kelly from WCS to come up here and introduce the various speakers. And there's plenty of literature out there on the table for you all to take with you. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and we can address those during this period or after. Anyway, Kelly.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Thank you. It's good to see so many familiar faces today for this timely briefing. I'm Kelly Allward. I'm the director of the Wildlife Conservation Society Washington office. We are part of the advisory council for the International Conservation Caucus Foundation. wonderful program today for you with speakers from Catholic Relief Services that are going to talk about their holistic approach to development that integrates agriculture and conservation to accomplish some quite significant goals in Madagascar. And we have what I like to call one of the leading experts in Madagascar, Gaylord, who's got a long history with the country that you're going to hear from later on in this afternoon for the presentations. Right now you're going to hear from Dr. David Levy. He is the Deputy Director of Program Quality Support Department at Catholic Relief Services. He oversees technical advisors working on agriculture, education, rights for finance, monitoring and evaluation, peace building, and water sanitation, as well as the publications unit. He has been started his long career at Catholic Relief Services, working in Angola, and so has some in-depth understanding of African issues in particular. And I'd like everyone to welcome Dr. Levy.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks for taking the time to come. Catholic Relief Services, for those who perhaps are not familiar with the organization, or CRS as it's often known, is a faith-based, multi-sectoral, non-governmental organization with relief and development programs in about 100 different countries around the world. In particular in Madagascar, given the focus of this afternoon, we have worked there for since 1962. It's one of the longest of any of the NGOs that have worked in that country. CRS uses a comprehensive, holistic approach to development that we call integral human development, or IHD. IHD draws from Catholic teaching on social justice, and is also based on an approach called the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework, that some of you may know from more secular contexts, which is used by many donors and development professionals. IHD seeks to promote the development of all people and the whole person. I put a lot of emphasis on that whole person part, looking not just at people's financial well-being and resources, but also their human development, that is education, health, spirituality, their social interaction with one another, their political voice, and the ability to influence the structures and systems that govern their lives, in particular governance issues that affect them. CRS uses IHD to design holistic approaches to development needs, taking into account people's assets, the shocks, disasters, and other trends to which they're subject, their livelihood strategies, how they go about earning a living, and the structures and systems that make decisions which affect them. I mention this because I wanted to give a specific example of how we use IHD to design our strategies. And that is in particular when we developed our strategy for agriculture and the environment a couple of years ago. We based it very much on IHD. The strategy itself is holistic, using agriculture as a platform to facilitate work in both emergency as well as development settings, as well as a linking to other sectors like health, nutrition, and in the case we're talking about today, watersheds, forestry, and markets also for income. We believe that agricultural development will not be successful if it's carried out in a vacuum without linking to these other areas. Protection of natural resources in particular, such as soil fertility, watersheds, and forests, is a vital part of any agricultural program if it is to be sustainable in the long term. Climate volatility, or what we see as the greater frequency and severity of droughts, floods, and other natural calamities, is also on the increase in many of the countries where we work. And it tends actually to have the most adverse consequences for the poor, people who tend to have the most marginal land access and otherwise tenuous access to natural resources. CRS seeks to help the poor adapt to these changes. I'm going to give you a couple examples. In Central America, for example, with USAID and other funding, CRS is helping farmers at low altitudes to grow alternative crops to replace coffee, which can only grow at higher altitudes as temperatures rise. Then we link farmer groups that are growing these crops to markets so that they can sell these crops to private sector traders and in some cases, local subsidiaries of Walmart, quite interestingly. Another example I wanted to point out was in Kenya, where also with USAID support, CRS is helping farmers to benefit from carbon credits by planting and maintaining trees that also help to protect watersheds from erosion and environmental degradation. So to conclude, it's through taking a holistic approach to development that CRS, other NGOs, and USAID can most sustainably work to reduce poverty, taking into account, for example, the linkages between agriculture and the environment in order to increase the resilience of the poor to climate volatility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Appreciate those remarks. We're going to hold questions until the end, so if folks don't mind, sort of jot down your ideas. We'll have a Q&A session after our next speaker. Lisa Gaylord is going to be talking to you about nature, health, wealth, and power, specifically in the Madagascar context, the importance of these key components of strategy in order to support development goals relating to food security, global health, as well as global climate change. How without one or all, we see that global, we see nature, health, wealth, and power not be as strong and as powerful strategy to accomplish development assistance goals. We really need a holistic approach in supporting all aspects of these. Madagascar lends a perfect example for us to look at this, and Lisa has a very long, in-depth history and knowledge of on-the-ground operations in Madagascar. Lisa is our Director of Program Development at the Wildlife Conservation Society, but really comes from our Madagascar Country Program as the Director most recently, and before that she worked at USAID Mission in Madagascar for upwards of 18 years, and before that was at Catholic Relief Services working in Madagascar. So we are fortunate to have such a guru with us this afternoon, and she is going to provide some insights for us on these issues. Without any further ado, Lisa, please. Copy? You did? No, you didn't. There we go. We thought we had our logistics organized. So, okay, well, thank you, and thank you all for coming. For me, I also would like to recognize that there are some other people here who actually have spent many of those years in Madagascar with me. One in particular I just would like to highlight before it is Karen Freudenberger, who's sitting here, who is author of this book that you will find out there called Paradise Lost, Lessons from 25 Years of USAID Environment Programs in Madagascar. And I think really does try and draw out what have we really learned. And I think it is, and while we talk about USAID environment programs, it was very much a program that involved all partners. And so when I speak today, when I use the word we, I didn't really know which we I should be talking from my WCS hat or USAID or CRS. And that's why I also wanted to thank David for coming, because that was where my roots were, where I started off as a development professional many years ago was with Catholic Relief Services. And so I think to understand kind of where I came from, so the principles of what CRS bases also is kind of what, you can see that in the presentation, and I think that many of us really have seen that linkage and the importance of that linkage. We have Frank Hawkins from CI, and Daniela Rake also, and Tom Erdman, and Asif Sheikh was also a key partner for us in moving forward with nature, health, wealth, and power. So I wanted to recognize these people because I think it's very important to understand that this was really a joint effort that we all did in terms of moving forward. Madagascar, I think, was really a model for the U.S. government, a flagship in the environment sector over many years. So with that, let me move forward. And kind of for those of you who may or may not know Madagascar, first of all, I think it's, just to know the importance of its biodiversity, that a hectare of
forest loss in Madagascar has a greater negative impact on global biodiversity than a hectare anywhere else in the world. And that actually was a statement coming from the U.S. Forest Service. In terms of Madagascar's unique biodiversity, 85% of the flora and fauna is endemic, and it's of course ranked among the world's mega diversity countries with, but also has many ecosystem services that are available: watershed protection, fertile non-eroding soils, clean water source, and also, as we have seen, that the importance of it playing a role in terms of mitigation of disasters. But there is a growing population that as you see anywhere in Africa, and that the population during the time period that I was there, which spans over 28 years, it has grown from 9 million in 1982 when I arrived to 20 million now, with a continued 3% growth per year. And what this does is also, directly contributes to increasing threats to the natural resource base, and of which slash and burn agriculture is by far the greatest threat. But you also are looking at charcoal production, illicit mining. A lot of people have heard about the illegal logging. We will come back to that a little bit later in the presentation. But also looking at an increased vulnerability to natural disasters. And that's what you see here in this photo here that really shows the impact of the deforestation on farmlands. And when I first arrived in Madagascar, you would be having maybe a cyclone once every 3 years. You now are having sometimes up to 7 in 1 year. So you really are seeing quite a dramatic, that year in particular. So as we look back over that, I think as Kelly highlighted, my experience in Madagascar is very diverse in terms of the organizations I worked for, but in terms of the sector, I worked across all sectors: environment, health, economic growth, and governance. And so I have that perspective of really looking at things holistically. And I think it's because of the importance of the environment that I think I ended up really focusing as that being and seeing it as really being cross-cutting. It's non-sector, it's a dimension. That's one of the things that I always said. And so what are we looking at as we're looking back? This is basically looking at the forest cover loss over the last 50 years. We have a map here on the wall, which also, if any of you want to go and take a look at that a little bit later, of showing what that historical data has shown. You could see that 31% of Madagascar's surface had forest in 1950, where that's down to 15% in 2000. And so that's a dramatic change in terms of the amount of forest cover, and that was really one of the main things that the program over the last 25 years, as we're looking there, was really focusing on starting to curb that deforestation. But as we look back over the 25 years, I would like to say it's a cautious celebration. That certainly deforestation has slowed. We can see that in these maps. But we still lost 2 million hectares during that time period. And that the remaining forests in the biodiversity continue to depend on them and are becoming increasingly vulnerable. And so I believe that today's challenges in Madagascar are even greater than they were 25 years ago, despite all the great efforts. And particularly, a figure that is included in Karen's paper is that 80% of Madagascar's forests, of Madagascar's population, are now within 1 kilometer of the forest edge, which means that you have a much greater increase in the density of population that are living on the forest. But as I had mentioned, from the outset, the programmatic focus in Madagascar was vertically integrated and holistic. And I think sometimes people think maybe we brought that on afterwards, maybe the last 5 years, but it was there from 1990, from the beginning. It was an integral part of the National Environmental Action Plan, which linked ecosystem and human health, and it's specifically stated in Madagascar's environmental charter. And so it was seen there, that linkage goes back to then. And so you saw that being focused at a policy, institutional building level, but then in particular, and this is what I want to show through this presentation, is how does that play out at the field level? Because I think sometimes when people talk about this, everyone agrees on the linkages, but how do you actually make it happen? How do you operationalize it? And so what do we mean by nature, wealth, nature, health, wealth, and power? As you see here, you have nature and health, which are the foundations of this pyramid, that without good natural resources, without a strong natural resource base, without healthy population, you're not going to be able to go towards economic growth. So that's a foundation that you need, and that builds towards economic growth. But what we found in Madagascar recently is if you don't have the good governance, the power, the good governance structures in place, all the rest will also fall apart. So I think it's really the interrelationship between all of these four elements that are key if you really are talking about sustainable development. And so the conceptual model from the outset in Madagascar was that, first of all, the priority protected areas were the anchors. They were the anchors to bring together the different sectors. So conservation, and given that was where that was at the center. And then you looked at that in relationship to how that related to economic growth, what were the health services, what were the needs of the population, and then how governance, again, making those links between nature, health, wealth, and power. So more concretely, I wanted to show this to you geographically as you look at the different intervention zones. So first of all, you have the forest cover. So on the east coast is where you have your rainforest, and this is where you have your dry and spiny forest. And so when we were looking at this and trying, these are U.S. government intervention zones. And so they were then looking at, okay, where is the overlap for the environment, rural development intervention zones? And obviously you can see it was up the east coast. So the importance of those humid rainforests. And those were the ones that were chosen as the priority areas to be. So one of the things that the U.S. government did was to specifically focus on those geographical areas. And they maintained those over the 20-year time period. Then we took the next overlay, which was looking at the ag trade hubs. So this is where you see some key ag trade hubs to try and look at the market linkages. And then the next was, where is the health activity? So there was a real effort to then look at health interventions in those same zones, and then looking at democracy and governance as the next layer that came in, of where those also were around, in particular these two, and then how those all came together. You could see where there was overlap. And so there's where you have everything, the darkest purple is where we were really trying to work hand in hand. So we really took this, and it was at a planning stage at the USAID mission amongst all of the different officers to bring together that common vision. And this was something that was, I think, quite specific to USAID as a donor. You did not see it happening with the other donors, and I think was really where USAID was a lead, really in looking at this holistic approach, using their funding across the mission to bring all of those partners together. Now I wanted to give you one more slide for those of you who have perhaps not had the opportunity to work at the field level like we have, of what does it mean, what does that look like at the field level? And so here it's just a series, and Karen will just bring them in, of where the different activities, just step back a minute so I can, now you have your natural resource management activities that are within that, at the communal level, the community forest areas, and then these are where your cash crops, not your cash crops, sorry, this is where you're looking at this farming systems approach where you're getting people to work on hillsides, and then in the valleys, and then we move towards looking at cash crop, private sector invested, some of the David made a mention of those types of things, and then looking at all the human health issues around the actual civil society and human health around the actual village or communal level. So it was really trying to look at it spatially within and how these all come together. And very honestly, the communities understand these linkages. It's often those of us who are higher up that have these silos. But at this level, they understand it. And it's actually, it would be, if you come in as a silo, you're dealing different people and different organizations would then be dealing with the same people. So what were our major accomplishments during that time period? I think the main ones were really looking at this tripling of the protected area. And that was one of the main things that came out of the Durban Vision and to the designation of these for community management. And also putting into place really a policy regulations and framework that was complete. And really trying to make the linkage to rural livelihoods and human health. But yet, we continue to see, systemic corruption. We continue to see that enforcement was weak, and we also saw that the yields and the adoption rates for agricultural techniques was low. And so that was in terms of the accomplishment. But the logic would have been to scale this up. That's what you want to do. You try and want to scale this up and take what your lessons learned are at the communal level and scale them up. But this was a difficult, what we found was that this would have been done with, if there was a favorable policy framework and planning process at the national level, and that together with other multilaterals and bilaterals, that you could then extend the U.S. government and interventions over space and time. But in reality, what happened was, instead of scaling up, the reality is we scaled down. Because what had to happen to get the results we wanted,